Hi class, in this recording we're going to focus on some of the more complicated genetic instances or instances of heredity in the human body. First we have polygenic inheritance. These are phenotypes that are going to be controlled by genes that are in multiple loci or multiple locations. Classic examples include eye color, skin color, your height, and there's some forms of cancer that are even going to be controlled by more than one gene at more than one location within our bodies. Another kind of odd thing out there is a pleiotropy, and a pleiotropic situation is when one mutation causes multiple phenotypes. So that one gene having more than one phenotype can happen. And a classic example is the inability to break down tyrosine. And if we can't break down tyrosine within our body, metabolically speaking, tyrosine is one of the amino acids, we have a disease state called alkaptonuria or nuria. And the classic symptoms or phenotypes associated with this disease include dark patches of skin on the scalp, darkened patches of sclera in the eye, and a darkening of our urine if we stand for a prolonged period of time. 3 different phenotypes all associated with one single allele at one single locus. We also are going to have sex-linked traits. These are traits that are associated with the sex chromosomes, the X and Y chromosomes. Usually, sex-linked traits are usually going to be inherited on or expressed in males because males will have one X chromosome almost all the time. So we have heterozygotes with males. And if the male inherits only one X chromosome, and that one X chromosome has a recessive allele on it, the male will express the recessive allele. For instance, color blindness is much more common in men than in women because it's a recessive trait. Women are homozygous, generally speaking, for the X chromosome, and if they have 2 X chromosomes, there's a pretty good chance that even if they did inherit one recessive allele, they're probably also going to have a dominant allele and not be colorblind. It is possible for a woman to be colorblind. It's just very unlikely. She would need to have a colorblind dad and a mother who was at least a carrier for colorblindness. And then in that situation, the woman would have a 50% chance of inheriting 2 recessive alleles, one from mom and one from dad. Another instance we need to talk about is the penetrance of the allele. Just because you inherit the genotype doesn't mean you automatically get the phenotype. So the percentage of the population that gets the phenotype you would expect is known as the percentage or the penetrance. So as we look at polydactylism, that is a dominant allele. However, it's only going to cause extra digits in about 4/5 or 80% of the people who inherit it. And one of the reasons that this happens is because sometimes not all genes are going to be activated equally. We have environmental factors at play that help to influence genetic expression. A classic example of that is pigmentation of the eyes. Newborn children don't have a lot of pigmentation of their eyes yet. The genes that control the melanin production within the iris of the eyes can't be fully expressed until the amino acid phenylalanine is in the diet. So here's a picture of my youngest child, Annabelle. And Annabelle, and this is a day or 2 after she was born, she had these nice deep dark baby blues, and she no longer has dark blue eyes anymore. But after being alive for about 2 years now, she's gotten enough phenylalanine from her environment to produce enough pigment so that her eyes have now changed color. Something else that we need to look at is the percentage of an individual allele within the population as a whole. Most people just assume that dominant alleles are always going to be more common than recessive alleles. That's not always the case. For instance, O is recessive with blood types is going to be recessive to A and B. And O blood types are the most common kind of blood type within American populations. 39% of the United States has O positive blood, and then another 9% has O negative blood. So we're looking at 48% of the country, or about half of the United States, having an O blood type, either O positive or O negative. As we look at dominant alleles can be really rare. For example, polydactylism, having 6 fingers on a hand, is pretty abnormal. Although for some weird reason, all of my barn cats at the farm where I grew up, all those barn cats had 6 toes on each one of their paws. It was kind of creepy. They were pretty inbred though. Another example of a dominant allele being rare is the AB blood type within the United States population. Most US citizens aren't going to have both of those dominant alleles. Having the 2 dominant alleles is a 4% chance for AB positive and a 1% chance for AB negative. So we're looking at about 1/20th of the US population having the 2 positive alleles, or the 2 dominant alleles for ABO blood typing. And then finally, any discussion of heredity would be remiss if we did not mention epigenetics. Epigenetics is kind of the new kid on the block right now. It's looking at how that activation of genes changes based off of environmental factors and how that influences the phenotypic expression within an individual. So we can change whether or not the gene is expressed without any mutations occurring. And this is all going to be based on DNA methylation, whether we are tightly binding that DNA to the histones within the nucleosomes, or are we loosely binding the DNA to the histones of the nucleosomes. If it's tightly bound, we can silence a gene. And as we look at DNA methylation and demethylation, this is one of the ways that we can help explain how identical twins look very similar when they're very young and they grow up in the same household and have the same environmental effect more or less, and the same genetics, but as they age, and especially if they go into different career fields, if one's a paper pusher, one goes to white collar, one goes to blue collar, then they have very different environmental situations, and they're going to physically start to diverge from each other dramatically. That's all we have for our discussion on heredity. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to post them in the class discussion board or to shoot me an email. And as always, happy studies.